I think a naturalist view of ethics I think it beats the religious view. I really do. I think that we can grant, and that is, again, that is Spinoza. He's the first person of the modern world who tried to ground. That's what the ethics means, grounding it in naturalism. So I'm just entirely inspired by him. He is and I used to say I'm the only, I used to live in New York. I used to say I'm the only intellectual Jew who's never been in psychoanalysis or any kind of therapy. And I just read Spinoza, when I'm down and I can't go further. He just lifts me up. He gives me perspective.
Hello, this is Robinson Erhardt, here with the introduction to Robinson's podcast, number 174. And this episode is with Rebecca Goldstein, who is a philosopher and novelist that received her Ph.D. in philosophy from Princeton University. She's also a MacArthur Fellow, who was awarded the National Humanities Medal by Barack Obama, and is an expert on Spinoza and Gödel, and has a bevy of other wide-ranging interests. So consequently, you won't be surprised to hear that we had a very wide-ranging conversation. We started off by discussing her influential novel, The Mind-Body Problem, and then some connections to the philosophy literature the philosophy of literature, I should say, before getting to her atheism, her aforementioned expertise on Spinoza, and what makes life meaningful, especially when one doesn't believe in God. So Rebecca's most recent book is Plato at the Googleplex, Why Philosophy Won't Go Away. And there's a link to that in the description, along with one of her other books, 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, which we discuss at length when we are talking about atheism. So now, comments, likes, reviews, subscribes, they're all extraordinarily helpful and appreciated. And without any further ado, I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it with Rebecca. When we were talking before recording, it came up that after being trained as an analytic philosopher in the philosophy of science, you published a novel, so the Mind-Body Problem, before getting tenure. And when we were talking about it, you said that this was stupid and it was a mistake. And I would have just thought that most people would be thrilled to publish a novel at any time. So why was it like this? This will be an insight into academia for people.
Yeah. I always loved novels, and I read them, and I felt very, very guilty. It was like a secret, that I would be reading novels when I felt I should be reading philosophy or physics or math, And because I had to, I came into philosophy from physics and math and had that kind of orientation. And something came over me. I don't know whether I had never an ambition to write a novel. Never. I just devoured them. I loved them, especially the really, 19th century big, fat, highly caloric novels. And I remember when I finished my dissertation, I happened to have been in Israel at the time, and I sent in, Tom Nagel was my dissertation advisor, and I sent it in to him. And then I had foregone reading novels while I was writing this dissertation. And I was starved for them. And I remember there was one bookstore that had English language novels, and they were a fortune. And I was a graduate student. I had no money. And it literally was, do I eat tonight or do I buy a novel? And I just had to buy, like Portrait of a Lady and Jude the Obscure, and, the bigger, the better. And so it's just always been, a passion, I would say. And then I remember I read a novel. It was by Mary Gordon, who had been a year above me in my undergraduate institution at Barnard College at Columbia, and she had just published a novel, Final Payments, and I read it, and I thought, oh, that's just wonderful. That's just and there was something philosophical about it, and it was just wonderful. And I thought, someday maybe I can produce one of these things. A few days later, I'm getting ready for work, early in the morning, and I just hear this voice, which is not mine, saying, I'm often asked what it's like to be married to a genius. I was married to a very brilliant man at the time, the physicist Shelley Goldstein, but he, like me, was very much in the beginning of his career. I had never been asked, what's it like to be married to a genius? That was not my voice, and it sounded very plaintive. It sounded, full of, I don't know, unrequited longing of some sort. She didn't seem happy, that voice. And I just thought, well, either I'm going mad, or this is a novel, and I have to discover who this protagonist is. And it was just, I don't know if it was a temporary madness or a temporary sanity. I mean, I still to this day, both of them would have, they're equally likely hypotheses. I don't know. But I had to write it. It was there, it was intriguing. And it, in fact, gave me some of my best ideas that I'm still following out. Some of the ideas about mattering and our longing to matter, and that I'm, that have somehow been developing over the whole course of my career, whether in fiction or in nonfiction. And sometimes when I write a book, I can't even tell anymore which it is, fiction or nonfiction. So anyway, that's how it happened. But it was stupid in a way because it was not the thing to do. I mean, first of all, what year was this? I had gotten my doctorate in 1977. Women in philosophy, especially women in philosophy of science, you really had to do everything right.
There's a lot of prejudice.
Oh God, yes. And to publish a novel, which got quite a bit of attention, and a novel kind of on the outside of analytic philosophy, because somehow that was the outside position that I just wanted to write from. I think I should say another thing that had happened to me was that I had lost my father. I had just lost my father, whom I completely adored and revered, and I had given birth to my first child. And I thought, well, I'm a Ph.D. in philosophy. I'm teaching. I'm assistant professor, and when it comes to these questions of how to deal with grief, how to raise a child, all of these kinds of questions, I'm an idiot. My training, quite the I've been so closed off about these things and sort of relegating them to the kind of things that existentialists deal with, or
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
And which I scoffed at, but I just realized, no, I mean, I'm a philosopher. I should have something. So I needed to be in a meta-philosophical state outside of my philosophical training. And I think that's one of the reasons that I had my narrator take such an outside point of view. But it didn't win me any points within philosophy. So in some sense, it was a very stupid thing to do. But there it was.
Yeah. Well, I can empathize with a lot of the things that you said. Do I eat tonight or buy a novel? What a great predicament to be in. But I mean, I also feel just the way you felt guilty about buying novels or reading novels. I feel a bit guilty about doing this podcast sometimes because I spend a lot of time on it and reading fiction or writing fiction, both of which I do a lot. I just read The Handmaid's Tale for the first time, and it was a great experience, but my advisor probably would have preferred if I were reading Quine, who's great too, but sometimes the soul needs literature. But
yes. I mean, the other thing I should say is my dissertation had been on, I think I had argued for panpsychism. It was at
Oh,
that
really?
point, yeah. And I was very, I was coming from it, from a background in physics. It was very much centered on what are the conditions for a reduction. What does it take? And I guess my case study was thermodynamics, the reduction to statistical mechanics.
Hmm.
What would it take to actually say, you know, he does not think but molecular motion, and this sort, so what are these kinds of
Interesting.
nothing but statements, reductions take, and saying, no, we're not there, we're not there now, and what would it take? And I sort of kind of was going towards, I've always been a materialist, but I didn't, I had an argument against reduction. It was similar to the kind of argument that I subsequently learned Bertrand Russell had made, that sort of, and but just the richness of the inner life, what it is to be a conscious human. I mean, any sentient creature, but we're particularly complicated. The inner life of a character was very much on my mind. I thought because also of my great passion um, for novels and poetry, and how hard it is to get it into words. To get all the nuances of consciousness, of human consciousness, into language, which is such a struggle, as a struggle that you struggle with in poetry and in fiction. And so, and then so it wasn't so much of a surprise that when it came to it, the novel was called The Mind Body Problem, and it was before David Chalmers had named it The Hard Problem of Consciousness, and I don't know that would have been such a good, I could have called it that if that's, but anyway, so that also fed into this first novel. And interesting enough, a few of my friends in philosophy told me that they never understood what people were going on about with what we now call the hard problem of consciousness, until they read the novel, actually. So that made me feel
Really?
extremely, I don't know if it made me feel more pleased or gratified than just astounded, really. Because I had been quite flippant about all that. I was very kind of flippant, yes, I think, when it came to the philosophy there. But anyway, so all of that, and probably more. I don't know, I still puzzle about it. And I still often think it was a mistake, and I would just have been happy to be a regular old philosopher, what I had always aspired to be. Because once you're outside of the community, and I felt very much an outcast, and I really separated myself after that. I you need people to talk philosophy about. I mean, you really do, and I don't like really talking about literature terribly much. I like talking about philosophy. That's where I always need the input, because one's intuitions can be so wrong. And so, yeah, anyway. So sometimes I think, what the hell? If I could go back, I wouldn't do it that way, or at least, I don't know, wait till I got tenure.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to get back to the ideas about consciousness, but first, I mean, you mentioned that the novel was on the outside of philosophy, and you mentioned ideas like grief and raising a child and the complexity of inner life. And as you said, these things strike me as existential concerns, as connecting much more with continental philosophy than analytic philosophy. And this is more of a broad question then. I see continental philosophy in many ways as continuous with at places, and certainly very close to literary criticism and literature. But I was wondering where you, because I know that you've taught and lectured on philosophy and literature, where you see it most closely connecting with analytic philosophy. Because I can think of some writers like Jorge Luis Borges, like so many of his, like the Library of Babel. I mean, that is fodder for tons of, like Daniel Dennett writes about that very often. It connects with his work. But where in general you see literature is connecting with analytic philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, Borges is a wonderful example. I mean, and in some sense, a novel is an extended thought experiment. And of course, we're always doing in philosophy and analytic philosophy thought experiments. And so it's and so that's how where I think of the connection. But in a novel, you want people to feel. It's a real balancing of you can't. I like putting arguments into novels, and I have one novel that has quite a few arguments in them, but in some sense, the arguments, which are mostly in an appendix, I thought of as in tension with the body of the novel, with all these emotions and how much deeper it all was. I mean, in some sense, what I was trying to argue by having an appendix appended to this novel was how little the arguments were getting at what was really going on, the richness of. So I feel them as quite disconnected, which is a difficulty for me. It's the way I feel them connected is, I think, I don't know how I say this. I mean, I've written, some sort of biographies like of Gödel and of Spinoza, and and sort of a weird, very weird book about Plato, and but I mean, they were all weird, but it's I mean, one of the things that I think I was very committed to, and that's been an ongoing idea, is that for thinkers of various kind, and for artists, but I mean, for thinkers, the passion is, is the ideas, is really these ideas. That there's a lot of story involved in that. There's just a lot, there was in philosophy, there were so many problems. So which ones call out to us? Which ones draw us? Like why did Gödel feel so strongly about Plato? And Spinoza, what it comes out of nothing. Really, well, it comes out of Descartes in a way, but still. What a thing to take on, and what was going on, so that there's a story there. There's always a story in people whose lives are thinking. It's thinking or ideas, particular projects, intellectual projects. So but that still doesn't say why. I don't find most novels connect with what we do as analytic. Quite the contrary, in some sense. I feel them very much in tension with each other.
Yeah, but I think considering the novel, as you said at the outset, as an extended thought experiment is a really nice way of putting it, because it's a way of setting the parameters, so to speak, and then testing or pumping intuitions, as Daniel Dennett would probably say. And I also see, I mean, especially in your case, it's very much a personal project for the author, like describing how you had to write the novel, and in the sense that it becomes a forge for the ideas you had, like mattering. So writing a novel, even if the final novel, not in your case, isn't necessarily a philosophical document, the process of thinking and writing is an extended form of philosophical thought in many ways, where it can be.
Yeah. I have to say Infinite Jest I found extremely philosophical.
Yes, all those footnotes. I mean, it connects with infinity a lot. Yeah.
And, and he was sort of playing, there was a meta infinite joke that he was hooking us into. I mean, it was a very elaborate, it was somebody trained in philosophy. Somebody who, you can sometimes tell when somebody has been, George Eliot is still one of my favorite writers. Middlemarch is perhaps my favorite novel. I remember when I read that in graduate school, again, sloughing off, not wanting my professors to know I was reading one of these novels. But I remember thinking, this is a very good philosophically ethical mind that's leading us through this novel. And sure enough, when I was asked to contribute for the Oxford Handbook on Spinoza, an essay on writers, on literary figures who had been influenced by Spinoza. Sure enough, she had been, as had also my other favorite. She had read and studied and been the first English translator of Spinoza. It only came out in 1976, her translation, but because her partner had a fight with the publisher, and so it was suppressed, her translation. And also my other favorite 19th century English language novelist, Melville, had also been quite obsessed with Spinoza. Oh, I find Moby Dick also just amazingly philosophical, though not necessarily analytic, but philosophy. You can tell they've thought through certain problems in writing these novels, and so those are very encouraging to me. Iris Murdoch, another person who was a kind of inspiration to me.
Well, philosophy of science has already come up, and then you mentioned your book that has arguments in the appendix, and that is 30 arguments for the existence of God.
36.
36.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm sorry. And this is serving as my segue now. So the last time religion came up on the show, I spoke with a nuclear physicist at MIT named Ian Hutchinson, who is a devout Christian. And one of his books is about how science is compatible with the miracles of the Bible. And so one thing I was hoping to talk about with you was why you've gone sort of the opposite route. And as I understand it, you were born and raised an Orthodox Jew?
Yeah, very much so. And I kept it for a very long time. And that was also the fault of Spinoza, because I was sent to a very really ultra Orthodox all girls school, and for high school, terrible school. And I mostly played hockey, and mostly going to libraries, trying to get myself an education, because we were not even being trained to go on to college. We were being trained to get married young. And but one day when I did show up for school, we were studying in Jewish history. We were studying modernity, about which we were against it. It was all downhill since Babylonia. It was, as very, very Orthodox people, we did not like modernity. We did not like the Enlightenment. And the story of Baruch Spinoza was told in my class as a cautionary tale of how things could go so wrong if you ask the wrong questions, little girls. We were always constantly being warned not to question, not to go to college, get married, and then the teacher had said, just as to show us what a stupid man this Spinoza person was, even though non-Jews thought he was quite bright, that he thought that God was nature, and that the Bible, the Torah, was not written by God. And suddenly I was like, oh, how interesting. And that was, I think, probably the only time I had ever asked a question in class, because I was just, there under duress. I did not want to be there. I just showed up enough not to get kicked out. But anyway, and the teacher was very suspicious of my questions, and so when as I say, I started when I would play hooky, I would mainly go to libraries. Well, the first thing I did was take out a book called The Story of Philosophy, and I first read the chapter on Plato, and it was by Will Durant, and it was just very much a popular presentation, but really quite good. Will Durant had been a socialist, maybe a communist, who lived in the U.S. and believed very much in writing books on ideas for the masses, for workers, and then I read the chapter on Spinoza, and was kind of pretty lost and baffled, but was interested, was very, very interested. But one of the things that the teacher had mentioned was that he kept his heresy, Spinoza, which is called apikarsis, which comes from Epicurus. The word for heresy in Hebrew is derived from the philosopher Epicurus.
Oh, interesting.
So Spinoza had kept his heresy to himself until both his parents died, so as not to bring shame to the family. And I was, I don't know, either 14 or 15, and I vowed to myself that I would do the same thing, that I would not bring my heretical thoughts out into the open until both my parents died. And partly, as I suppose, my training or my indoctrination in Orthodox Judaism, which takes vows extremely seriously, even though I was an atheist and became even more and more of an atheist, I kept it. I kept orthodoxy until both my parents had died, and which was very difficult because I had already become, because I had published this novel and then other novels. I'd become a little bit of a public person. People would interview me, and outwardly I was an Orthodox person, keeping these laws, but inwardly not at all. But I kind of walked this tightrope of not being hypocritical, but not bringing shame on my family because of that vow. I would never suggest that anybody do what I did. It was felt like just a lack of integrity on my part. So when I finally did come out as an atheist, it felt like such a liberation, and I became very active in what I call organized non-religion. These many groups, Atheists of America, Freethinkers of America, and this and that, and there's so many groups, and they tend not to have that many women, and so they were very, very happy to welcome me in and give me awards and Richard Dawkins Award, all sorts of the free thinking heroine or something like that. I don't know. I have a whole bunch of.
I saw the Dawkins Award.
Yeah, it's a very nice award, and so that was, that's so. What I would say is, I became an atheist at about 14, 15, hit it, and then sort of came out full blast, but then I sort of thought, it felt very good for a few years, and I'm still, what I identify with certainly as an atheist and a secular humanist. But I often thought that they were too dismissive of religious people, and that it was not just flaws in arguments, flaws in thinking, that it was much more complicated than that. And, my family is very Orthodox, but really smart. There are people in my family that, their brains are really working very well. And I was kind of I sometimes just felt like there was too much simplification going on, and I thought, and that's the kind of thing where I start thinking in terms of novels, how much more complicated these inner lives are, how, yes, what complexity in human consciousness. I kept thinking somebody should write a novel about this, about now, at this moment of time, with, the new, what we call the new atheist, making quite a splash at the time, and the religious, religious people and religious life and religious, and particularly as I know it, in terms of Judaism, where loyalty to a certain history has such a part to play. And I just kept thinking, yes, somebody should write a novel. And then finally, there it was. I was writing a novel on it. And that's that argument. That book, 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, a work of fiction. The subtitle was very, very important because it was the first joke, God being a work of fiction. But in my heretical way of thinking. 36 also is an important number in mystical Judaism, as a matter of fact.
Kabbalah?
Yeah. And there is a tradition that there are always and every time in the world at least 36 righteous people for the sake of whom God doesn't destroy the world. And I grew up thinking that my father must be one of those 36 people. So that myth has always played a big part in my inner world. So, but I did produce 36 arguments for God's existence with their flaws.
Right. I agree that in my experience, atheists are also often much too dismissive of religious people and their beliefs. And for me, it arouses more curiosity than anything else. So, for instance, with Ian Hutchinson, who I mentioned, he's an MIT physicist. We spoke all about plasma physics, nuclear physics. It's very hardcore intellectual stuff. So his mind is working very well, but at the same time, he believes that the miracles like turning water into wine or walking on water, these things happened. And I just find it curious how he and I can both have access to the same texts, same sort of reasoning about their veracity, and then end up with completely different conclusions. That to me it's not a cause for dismissal, but a cause for curiosity and inquiry.
I agree. I agree. And, I was, before you started taping, we were discussing another Goldstein, Shelley Goldstein, who was my first husband. And Shelley Goldstein is, again, he's probably one of the smartest people. Yeah, he may be the smartest person I've ever known. He's just, but certainly up there. And he's Orthodox. He's Orthodox, and it was always a mystery to me. The many years that we were together, how it could be. But there it is. People are complicated, and even many. So I think the longing to matter is extremely deep. I think it's a defining characteristic in what makes us human, and that is the longing to prove ourselves. It's a little bit taking off of Tom Nagel's ideas in his article "The Absurd," but the longing to prove ourselves to be as deserving of our incessant self-attention or self-involvement as we have to be in order to live. But we can take this step outside and say, and just look at ourselves, and it's like, we're just one of many, and we're just here for a short time, and what gives us the right to take ourselves so seriously? And out of that, I think there's this, with our lives, we somehow want to, so that we can live our lives without utter despair and disgust, which is what depression is. And the words of depression are, I don't matter and I never will. Those are the words of depression. To keep going. And this is existentialism, of course. I mean, this is the notion of the absurd. We find ourselves a project, a ground project. And we throw ourselves into it, and it's buried in there. But there are people, and I know many atheists who are convinced that the only way that we could truly matter is if there was a God, who created us and who created us for a purpose, so that somehow or other we participate in the narrative of eternity, as fleeting as our lives are, that we are somehow participating. And look, I mean, I just had back and forth with Alex Rosenberg, the philosopher at Duke, and he wrote, I think it's somewhere right around here, The Atheist Guide to Reality, hardcore atheist. And he had read, I'm writing about this now, and he had read a draft of it, and I talk about different strategies of mattering, and he said, but really, the only mattering that counts is what I call cosmic mattering. That is, mattering to the universe at large in the form of some kind of transcendent metaphysical entity, whether you call it God or divine presence or higher principle or whatever, that he thought that, that he, so, and I think, where we end up, on this question of mattering, is a deep question about our own tempers, all sorts of things. But I think that motivates a lot of very, very smart religious people who, they may somehow, they're going to accept that the divine exists. And if the divine exists, the divine can occasionally contravene laws of nature. Why not? So yeah, I mean, that's how I come to see it now. Does that make any sense?
No, and it totally resonates with me too. I recently reread Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death, and which is all about, he doesn't use the word mattering, but it's all about the fact that we inescapably live in this world of value, and we adopt heroic projects to ensure that we matter. And I've been thinking about that myself, because I'm also an atheist, and in the past, when I've been depressed, when I've been most depressed, I've been extremely nihilistic. But what I've realized is, even if I don't think that there's a God, there's no cosmic mattering, I am still human, and just by virtue of the way I'm constructed, I cannot perceive the world as being bereft of value. I can't drink this cherry Coke and think it tastes good. I can't have a conversation without enjoying it. I mean, it's just inescapable.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, how does this go down? So, there are certain very, very deep things that we can't, they're built into our lives. They're built into what, we can't justify them. I mean, logic is like that. We can't run circularly. Descartes got into all sorts of trouble when he tried to, now he's proves God, he's going to justify logic, vicious circle. Or Hume is full of this, right? The problem of induction, there is, and yet, we can pursue our lives without believing in the uniformity of nature of things. If there is a lot of evidence for a law, and we find seeming a violation of law, we don't say, oh, yes, miracle. We go and we back to the drawing board. We try to fix up our formulation of the law so that it takes into account this anomaly. And so, that it's just the workings of what it is to be human, and to pursue a recognizably human life, animal life, really. And so too with our taking ourselves, as mattering, that we matter. If I have a desire and nothing goes against it, and then I can satisfy it, I can gratify it, I can make plans for the future, I can take my future seriously, I can take my survival and flourishing seriously. I have to. There's no getting around it. And then, so we can live our lives with that regarding something as mattering, namely ourselves and also the people we love. Impossible not to. And then certain other things follow from that. Like, oh, well, what gives us the right? It's probably something that we share with at least all other humans, right? It's not my special talents or being born into some special group, or those all sort of flake off. They're not very good, but it's probably something that we share with everybody. So the extent that I regard myself as mattering, I have to regard everybody else as mattering. I mean, that's, I don't know, to me, just putting it in the same kind of category as how we deal with logic and how we deal with deductive and inductive logic. That maybe this is the same kind of thing that we do in these values that we have, and in then looking at our values, and refining them and seeing where our own egocentric or ethnocentric ideas are making them less than reasonable, but which is pretty much the story of how we've made some progress. I mean, we know that people matter. When we see what's going on in the world right now, when we look at, what's happening in Gaza and in Israel, and, what children, every fiber of us, says, wrong, this is wrong. We're not nihilists. And we don't have to be, even if we're atheists.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you, but tying this back to how we got on this topic,
Did we?
Sorry?
How did we get on this topic? I don't remember.
God.
Yes.
God. Yeah, but I can see how a desperate desire for mattering can contribute to a belief in God. And I mean, without being condescending, I think you and I as atheists would say that there is some flaw in reasoning that leads people to believe in God, but this connects to the mattering because the desire to matter is emotional, and being emotional gets in the way of rationality.
Yeah.
I think that's how I think about it. But maybe it would be a good time to get into some of the 36 arguments themselves, just because I have had a lot of conversations about the philosophy of physics and the philosophy of science lately on the show, and I think that a lot of these arguments are ostensibly science-based, and they connect to some of these topics quite nicely, like fine-tuning is one example. And so are you familiar with Sean Carroll?
With who? Sean?
The name Sean Carroll?
Yes, I know him. Yeah.
I recently did an episode with him and David Albert, a philosopher of physics.
Yeah, know him too. Yeah.
Yeah, at Columbia. And we talked a bit about fine-tuning, and just for maybe you'd like to explain how you think about fine-tuning, but Sean said that he thinks fine-tuning is the best argument for the existence of God, but it's still a terrible argument.
Yeah. I mean, I would have thought that the many worlds really somewhat explodes. We happen to be in a world which is conducive to life and to our asking these questions, but there are so many other, in the multiverse, there's so many. I mean, it seems to make it even if almost all possibilities are realized, there are many more possible worlds in which, you know, the electron equals something different, it's so. It doesn't. It's never held very much of a. It powers me the argument for fine tuning, but now I just find it. I don't know why, given that the most popular interpretation of quantum mechanics is the multiverse, we would find this at all. I don't know. I should ask actually my former husband what he thinks of it. I think he did not find the argument from fine tuning to be particularly. I've always found actually Spinoza's argument for God, of course, the best argument. Which is, but of course it's for a God that's just so completely different from any religious notions of God, and to the extent that it's a good argument, and it very much depends on a very strong understanding of the principle of sufficient reason. That there always has to be a reason for why something exists, and there has to be a reason for why something doesn't exist, why it doesn't exist, and so what you end up with is again this very maximal universe, which everything that could possibly exist does exist, so that so as long as it's not excluded by logic, it's almost I guess it's a multiverse, and that's God, that's nature, that's the whole infinite order of being, and it's in some sense it's godlike because it explains its own existence. It exists because it has to exist by reason of the principle of sufficient reason, and it's a object of great infinity that makes us feel our finitude, but we have our place in it and we can contemplate it to some extent, and to the extent that we do, it raises us up, it gives us perspective, it makes us better, it snuffs out all of our negative emotions, and gives us the positive emotion of understanding. So in that sense, to find our place in it is to understand our own being and to become better people. But it's so, to the extent that it's and I can get myself into that sort of state of reverence towards Spinoza's God easily. But, to the extent that I do, it just undermines any other conception of God, and which was of course part of Spinoza's argument as well.
This notion of the state of reverence is interesting because that is what often happens to me when I think about these science-based arguments for the existence of God. Because I find the fine-tuning question more compelling than it sounds.
Tell me, yes.
Like you do. Well, there are. I think I might be wrong, but I think you might be conflating two conceptions of the multiverse. So the many worlds version of the multiverse, I don't think really connects that much with fine tuning. It's just there's every act of observation can result in a branching that each branch contains every possible outcome of this observation. But the sort of multiverse that you're talking about is, I think, of more maybe string theoretic or inflationary, where there are sort of island universes in which every island universe corresponds to one of the innumerable potential varieties of physics. And the reason that I just don't find that so compelling at this point. It's an empirical question that it's a hypothesis at this point, but it hasn't really been proven or supported. It's purely theoretical. And in the absence of a knockdown sort of argument or knockdown empirical confirmation, I'm still left with the sort of awe about how is it that physics is so perfect for life, and if any of these little constants were just slightly tweaked. I mean, not any of them. Some of them there's more wiggle room than others, but we just wouldn't exist. And that gets me into this state of reverence. But of course, the problem that I identify, or that is apparent when looking at this list of 36 arguments in the appendix of your book, is that we often sort of substitute this state of reverence and awe for something that is just as equally demanding of explanation, namely the existence of God. But sort of because the definition of God contains his own perfection and existence, we just sort of sweep that
Yeah.
under the rug.
See, I think I'm much more. I hear you, and I think you're quite right that I was conflating two different notions of the multiverse, and I thank you for that. It's I think my tendency my intuition is to think, it's in the nature of the laws themselves. That would explain this, that our understanding, and I think goes back to the original question we were talking about, consciousness, that our understanding, of physics, of matter, it's so incomplete. I mean, to me, it's a marvel that we understand anything, that we've gotten as far as we have. And we've gotten this far because of the wedding of observation and mathematical description. To me, that's kind of amazing that we landed on that, and it actually has worked. It's worked very, very well, that this language of math has revealed aspects of matter and energy and space and time that go against our folk physics, against our intuitions. We've been able to, but who knew that was going to work out? And it did. But who says that is giving us a complete description? We're completely dependent on mathematics to get us into these laws of nature. We've got very far. It's amazing. But, I find it so unlikely that it's telling us everything. And I also think, what it's not telling us about is consciousness. And we know that matter is capable of consciousness because we are matter that's conscious. And that, it's hard to think how physics as we know it could ever get us to that. So, I find a lot of these arguments from science taking for granted that our physics is much more complete. And of course, Sean, has an argument that is really quite complete, our standard physics, right? But I don't buy that. I don't buy that. So I don't know. It's just never. Maybe it's the best arguments that there is, and you're right. It can wake us with wonder. I mean, the beauty of physics always is a source of great wonder. I mean, that the laws of nature should be so beautiful, mathematically beautiful.
Right. That's another argument in the book.
Absolutely. And, I feel that really strongly. But always it seems to me that we're just presuming that we know much more than we do.
Right. No, I'm in total agreement with you that the solution to fine tuning lies with physics and not God, and that the lack of our having an answer corresponds directly to our lack of understanding of physics, and
And
consciousness
consciousness
is
and
the right
time. I
analog.
mean, time. Such a time as we get it in, Einstein, in physics is so very different from time as we experience it, and how we bring these two things together. It's there. It's in time. It's out there. The answer is out there. We know what we know, and we don't know a hell of a lot. It's to me, it's just amazing. We know as much as we do. We're just a bunch of evolved apes.
Mm-hmm. One of the nice things, though, about believing in God is that it really nicely solves for these people issues like fine tuning. And one that I wanted to ask you about, because I'm co-teaching a course right now at the introductory ethics course here at Stanford, and we just did divine command theory, which is, for our listeners, I mean, there's more nuance here than this, but the idea, I think it's the best or the simplest, realist account of where morality comes from, of metaethics. Basically, what good is, or what wrong is, or what good actions and right actions are, come directly from God. He decides this, and that's where our ethics or morality comes from. But if you are not a believer in God, then this throws a wrench in morality. And I'm wondering how you have come to think about morality. I mean, especially given what you mentioned earlier, what's going on today in Gaza and Israel. Where do you think morality comes from as a humanist?
Yeah. So, of course, the divine command theory is always put forth as against, or there is. Isn't it true that usually when people call it the divine command theory, they're kind of have in mind the Euthyphro argument from
Yes,
Plato,
the Euthyphro's dilemma.
That it doesn't help to bring God into this. And actually, Spinoza has that in the ethics end. But yeah, I mean, Plato had it in the argument in the Euthyphro, that either because then we ask how we know that
it's objective or subjective, but neither one seems to give us what we really want, because either God just changes his mind on a whim.
Yeah, it's either just a whim. Yeah.
Or there's nothing really inherently good or bad about actions. We're just trying to please God, essentially.
Yeah. Or, the reason that God wants us to be kind to the widow and the orphan is because it's really good. Either he just has no reason for it, or he does have a reason. If he has no reason, it's just a whim. He might have just said, "Yeah, go destroy," as actually in the Bible he does when it's the wrong tribe. Go destroy every last soul. So that's if it's just he has no reason. It's just his aesthetic taste or something. Or he does have a reason, in which case there's a reason. And whatever the reason is, that's the reason. God had a reason. So it's either just, God is either redundant, or the God hypothesis is either redundant, or just, doesn't do the trick. It doesn't give us morality. It just gives us, you better obey him because he's in charge, right? But it's not morality as we understand it. Yeah, well, the stuff I was saying about morality, about mattering, is the way that to say that I matter is to say that I am deserving of certain attention from other people. I can't be treated in a certain way, and it's rooted in the way we pursue our life, just as the laws of induction are rooted in the way we pursue our lives. There's no way to live my life without regarding myself as, in some sense, matters, as having a certain deservingness to to be regarded as a certain. I think that's what we mean when we talk about the intrinsic dignity of human, life. Which is not to say that other animals don't also have their dignity, or it's not to the degree at which they are similar to us that they get their dignity. They have their own dignity, but we have, I pack a lot into the fact that we long to matter. I think it shows that we do, or that we can't liberalize without assuming that we do, which is already a value judgment. So that we live, that we're not trying to get from is to ought. We live in the land of ought. We live in the space of ought. We can't pursue our lives without that. And then we have to do it consistently, and so in regard to our fellow creatures. But that's all the morality I need. That's all the grounding I need. If we actually treated each other as if we actually mattered equally, man, it would be a different world. It would be so much of what we want for morality. For me.
So just to try to put it into my own words, it connects to what I was saying maybe about this Coke being good or a conversation being enjoyable. It's just, and maybe channeling your husband, it's just a fact of how we're wired. Current Steve, that through evolution, we've just been endowed with faculties that in such a way that we cannot go about our lives assuming that we're fully intact without perceiving the world morally. It's just something intrinsic.
We can get the morality really, really wrong.
Yes.
Yeah. And there I think there really are mistakes being made, fallacy. Often, this is not really a human being in the way that these others are human beings, right? And the way I am a human being and the ones I love are. And that's a fallacy. But so, this can get us into very bad moralities, but that we think in terms of ought. That's just being human. It's just being human. So, yeah. To me, it answers, just because of the Euthyphro argument, it's much more satisfying than appeal to God. And Lord knows, appeal to God has made an awful mess sometimes, terribly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Still does.
But, bringing Spinoza back into things, I think I read that you have said that, his work, his opus, The Ethics, is maybe your favorite, or at least one of your favorite, or certainly one of the most important philosophical works for you. And I understand, though, that I haven't read The Ethics, but that it covers, all aspects of his system of philosophy, not just ethics. But what precisely, how did he think about morality and ethics?
It's not, I think that my views, although I think so much in terms of, science since it's developed in the 3.5 centuries since he died, and very much in terms of natural selection and physics, entropy, where all living systems are battling against the entropic odds. And what that means is we have to treat ourselves as if we matter. It's kind of the organizing principle of all the instincts, right? It's not even an instinct. It's deeper than that. So we're sort of pushing back against entropy, and which means devoting an awful, regarding ourselves as the most, is deserving to survive and to thrive. And it's built in there. But Spinoza, interestingly, has this notion of quantitas, which comes from the Latin for to strive, and he identifies it as the individuating principle, as the kind of what constitutes the identity of each thing. Each thing is striving to persist and to thrive in its own existence. I mean, he doesn't have notions of entropy, notions of natural selection to back it up. Spinoza, I mean, Galen Strawson once wrote this to me. That Spinoza seems, in all of his intuitions, even though it's like, there wasn't very much science when he was starting out there in the 17th century, his intuitions are just so on target. And, and can be used. I mean, we can use modern science like entropy, like natural selection to fill them in. But yeah, so for him, this is like a starting point for what our psychology is like, what each thing is trying to do, this conatas. And he tries to derive, ethics from both that, excuse me, and also his notion of what reality really consists in, this maximal ordinate being that is dictated by logic, by necessity, and so so that whatever can exist does exist, and out of that comes everything, and to the extent that we understand this, we get out of ourselves, we get perspective, we understand that to act in our own interests is to act in everybody's interests. All of this stuff, comes out, and we it's a little bit like Plato too, and if we're going to have the only thing that can mitigate our pettiness and our constricted focus on ourselves, or worse instincts, egocentrism, is reality itself, the full force of reality, which is so grand, such a, again, object of wonder and reverence, that we can attain some kind of grandeur and reverence and nobility. He likes that word, nobility, in the process. So that's his ethics.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this, and I just think I had a stroke of originality that I just forgot that you said it half an hour ago. But did mattering at all come out of Conitas? Did it influence you there?
Mattering in Spinoza, does he talk about it, or
No, your view on mattering, was it informed by?
totally? Yes, it is what I like to think of as, Spinoza knew all science and been, yeah.
Huh. I also can. You mentioned panpsychism very early on in the conversation, and that seems to connect to this as well, because you said each thing is trying to strive, and I'm wondering, was that limited to living things, or all things are
For
striving?
Spinoza, it's all things. Spinoza is a anti-dualist of all dualists. All of our dualisms. He wants to explode nature versus God, reason versus emotion, and in some sense, mental versus physical. Yeah, I would say mental versus physical. Yes, too. It's all, this unity is meant to explode all dualities. I mean, he is,
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, Galen Strawson is interested in panpsychism. Is that why he was connected to Spinoza?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Hmm.
But
Are you?
I know that
Go ahead.
Philip Goff,
Yes.
who was a student, right, of Strawson, of Galen Strawson, I think he was his graduate student, and when he was still a graduate student, he did this book on, a collection of essays on Spinoza, and I think that his panpsychism is probably also somewhat informed by work on Spinoza.
Very cool. Philip and I are talking soon, so I'll have to ask
Yeah,
him
do
about
ask him
that.
that. Yeah.
Are you a panpsychist now, or
I don't know. I go back and forth between a Mysterian and a panpsychist.
a Mysterian?
Mysterian.
I don't know that
Oh,
word.
just that. I don't know. It's the sort of thing that I was saying before that we know so very little that it's hard to say. Oh, does it come from matter? I mean, is it all? It is the. If we knew the laws of matter with more refinement, more complexity, more completeness, we would be able to see that consciousness comes out of it. So we're just stuck now in this mystery. Um, I go back and forth between that and panpsychism. Well, it's got to be built into the very basic of matter. It's got into the complete description of matter would show us that something like proto consciousness is built in at the very fundamental level. I go back and forth.
Hmm.
What about you?
Well, I think along with Sean, as you said, is convinced that our physics is quite complete. It seems, or we have all the pieces at least. And consequently that we absolutely don't need to do any revising to account for consciousness. I am not so confident about that, though I have vanishingly little understanding of physics relative to him, so my opinion here doesn't hold that much weight. But I still cling to the hope that physics, at least in the spirit in which we've been undertaking it, will explain consciousness. That's at least what I'm hoping for at this point.
Yeah, it's
But I
yeah.
also I find the hard problem hard to wrap my head around. And while I don't understand how we could ever verify panpsychism, if somehow physics bottomed out and we had no idea what was going on, then I think I would begrudgingly convert to panpsychism and just assume that everything has some qualitative component to it that we can't get to quantitatively.
Yeah. Well, I just find it unlikely that mathematical description, quantitative description, which is basically, describing little things in motion, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we can capture in our mathematical language. I mean, the notion of a field is, how would something move when it is in, different parts of the field? And, it's always that is getting everything. When Bertrand Russell said, it's not even getting to the intrinsic properties.
Mm-hmm.
That to me makes a lot of sense. So I tend to think that if we, and if you go back to the 17th century, man, they were, so, there's Spinoza and there's Galileo. And he makes this, fundamental move, right? Primary, secondary. If we can describe it in mathematical language, it's really objective. It's out there. If math can't capture it, the difference between red and yellow, okay, light frequencies, that we can capture in mathematical language, but the felt difference experience between, red and green, well, then it's secondary and it's in the mind. And it's caused by the interaction between what's out there and our nervous system, or, that was so fundamental. That's the break with Aristotle. Instead of final causes, we've got mathematical description, observation, formulated in mathematical language. We can develop these mathematical relationships. We can discover, we can go deeper and deeper. But what an assumption to think, that what's out there, all that's out there, that's complete. We get a complete description of that. in describing it mathematically. And if it's not subject to that, it can't be captured in the language of mathematics. It's in the mind. And then we have the problem. Well, how do we get what's in the mind, what we dumped in the mind, out of this mathematical description? And yeah, so it's just, what's made physics work, it seems to me, was a basic assumption that math can be captured in mathematics. And I just see no reason. And to me, it's just, it might have worked. I mean, there are internal problems with physics anyway. There's tension between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and, there's all of that. But time, what is it really? But consciousness also is just, it seems to me to be saying, if you don't have it all. It's we don't have it all. You've done really well with what you have, math. But I don't know. Yeah, that's. I think it'd have to be. So Sean thinks we will be able to get it out. Not that we have gotten it out, but we will be able to get it out.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I pray that I live to see the day, because I think that would be a tremendous triumph, and that would be such a triumph of our collective scientific endeavors.
Well, Rebecca, one thing I wanted to ask you about before we ended, and maybe if you want, I can cut this out. We can skip this, but we sort of delayed this conversation by a few months because you were working on a new book, and you're still working on it. I just was curious what the project is.
Yes, mattering.
Mattering. Okay. Is it a novel, or is it philosophy?
No, it's not. And it's just why we have this, starting with entropy and going to natural selection, and then our neurophysiology that allows us to, self-reflection, self-transcendence, this question, stepping outside of ourselves, and what it's wrought in our world, for both better and worse. I see 4 types of mattering strategies. I actually, way back in the book on the mind body problem, that novel, I had come up with this idea of the mattering map. That we will occupy these different regions, and in terms of how we're trying to prove to ourselves that we're deserving of all of this attention that we give ourselves, regarding ourselves as, just to live our lives, have to regard ourselves as more important than we know that we are. So, many regions of this, and that's been like a source of inquiry for me ever since I wrote that novel. And I'm always talking to people about their sense of mattering, how they pursue it, what their meaning-making project is. Have they changed it? Were they born into it? Was it? I don't know. To me, this just generates. It's such interesting stories about people, and it's interesting. I found over. I guess I've been asking these questions for 40 years now of people. So I got way too much information, but then when people get the point of your question, it's just that they've been waiting their whole lives for somebody to ask them this question, like, how are you? I've spoken to ex-Nazis about this, and I'm afraid to talk to current Nazis about it, but I probably should. But I have spoken to ex-Nazis about it, and you just also, and of course, religious people, and but I see 4 kinds of major strategies. There's what I call cosmic matter, cosmic petitioning. Please, the world has to be this way. Some kind of grounded on some kind of metaphysics, so that we we really do matter in this very maximal way. And that is the most maximalist notion of mattering. I think it's another reason why it's so pleasing to be religious, or at least spiritual. And psychologists have done all this testing, and it's religious people do have a much higher sense of life satisfaction, not necessarily of happiness, but of life satisfaction, purpose, and meaning in their life, because that's just a maximalist sense of mattering. There's what I call heroic striving. People like me, probably like you, some kind of intellectual work or artistic work or athletic or ethical striving, but I'm going to do something that's really, really hard and that makes me matter. At least to myself. It justifies me to myself. I mean, it doesn't have to be like your name up in lights and anybody knows about it, but it can be the most quiet and modest thing, but justifying myself to myself. I think that's what mattering is really about. Cosmic mattering, heroic mattering, relationships. And it's so interesting. So many people, when I ask them, how do you pursue your what does mattering mean to you? Mattering to others.
We're social creatures.
We are gregarious creatures. Absolutely. And so close relationships, and sometimes terrible relationships. I think that the striving for fame is such a huge thing. Is like for lots of attention from lots of people, to matter to lots of people who find you deserving of their attention. And I put that in and then there are the sort of competitors who really understand mattering is mattering more than others. And to the extent that somebody matters as much or more than they do, they matter less. It's kind of a zero-sum thing. Trump is a perfect example. But they don't have to be bad. They can be seem like heroic strivers. They can be, also striving to do something that very much motivated by being better than others. Whereas I think of heroic strivers as in competition with themselves, not with others. Anyway, I'm real interested in these questions. It's kind of, why are we like this? What has it done? Where should it lead us morally? So it's a little, and it's very much inspired by Spinoza. Very much.
Great. Well, it would be totally lovely to talk again. I mean, when you're finished with this book, to get into more depth on the project. I find it very compelling that it begins with entropy and natural selection and physiology, because tying the natural world to the lived world is a daunting challenge.
It's a really daunting challenge, but I think a naturalist view of ethics I think it beats the religious view. I really do. I think that we can grant, and that is, again, that is Spinoza. He's the first person of the modern world who tried to ground. That's what the ethics means, grounding it in naturalism. So I'm just entirely inspired by him. He is my, and I used to say I'm the only, I used to live in New York. I used to say I'm the only intellectual Jew who's never been in psychoanalysis or any kind of therapy. And I just read Spinoza, when I'm down and I can't go further. He just lifts me up. He gives me perspective.
That's so funny, the only intellectual Jew who hasn't been in psychoanalysis. But this has been so fun. I'm already very much looking forward to round 2 and getting more into the mattering, because it's very important for my life too. These are the questions that I ask. I've just never used the words mattering or striving.
I also love the fact that it's the word matter, that seems to me that what defines us is we are creatures of matter who long to matter. That's what we are. And that's where our triumph and our atrocities come from, So, but I love the word matter.
Mm-hmm. No, I that connection, I hadn't really drawn that connection until you just said it, but it is great. It ties the natural to the lived world. But Rebecca, thank you so
Well,
much
thank
for
you.
taking
Thank
the
you so
time and
much.
having this conversation with me.
Thank you.
Hold on. If you haven't subscribed, liked, commented, or reviewed, that would be so helpful. And if you haven't yet, you could also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Robinson Erhardt.